Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from LastCar.info coming at you for Behind the Wall, the post-race show that comes on after the race. Happy Father's Day to all of you out there, and a happy, crazy inaugural race at the Iowa Speedway here. A lot of apprehension coming into this event, both about the new surface and tire wear going into this. Certainly we had a very physical Xfinity Series race yesterday, which we will also talk about on the show tonight here. But I would have to say this event pretty much had just about everything under the sun that you could hope for here, especially if you're a Ryan Blaney fan. Things stretched out a little bit more towards the end, but definitely some unpredictability out there about, if somebody's tire is going to let go or, just any kind of strategy. I mean, the types of drivers that we saw really struggling in this race too, to see drivers such as Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson both end up in the bottom five there with different issues in the race. And Blaney pulling off the win over William Byron by 0.7 of a second, 0.716 to be exact here under the unofficial results here. Chase Elliott in the third spot, Christopher Bell in the backup car climbing up from the last spot to finish fourth, Ricky Stenhouse in fifth, Joey Logano in sixth. Josh Berry looked like he had one of the best runs of his career, certainly since Bristol, when he was running in another race where tire wear was very critical. He looked like a world beater out there, the number 4. Seventh place finish, fine job by him. Alex Bowman taking home 8th, Suarez in 9th, and Brad Keselowski, after a hard-fought battle with Ross Chastain towards the finish, comes out with a 10th place finish there. And not to overlook Stenhouse here either. Very impressed with his run on here. This in a race that was very physical and demanding here. You don't really think of Stenhouse as being somebody that would conserve tires or anything. But definitely a fantastic strategy for him, and good to see it work out for him, and a great paint scheme that he runs too. The NOS Energy machine. So a fine showing for him too. Further back here, some really surprising runs just outside the top 10. Todd Gilliland taking home 12th. We saw him up in the top 5 there at one portion of this race here, having a fine job on a day that his teammate Michael McDowell had several issues there in the closing stages with flat tires. Justin Haley was in 10th place pretty much the entire race, except for a early pit penalty that dropped him to the back of the field, and then he got right back up to the top 10 there. Unfortunately, lost a couple spots there in the final run to finish just outside of it, but still, I think a fine showing there for the Rick Ware racing effort there. I'd say even better than his Gateway run since he was so consistently among the front runners there. So a fine job there. Carson Hocevar ends up being the last car on the lead lap in 14th after the race got off to a pretty rough start for he and his Spire Motorsports teammates. Hocevar getting a little too aggressive into turn 1, getting into Zane Smith, who got into LaJoy and spun LaJoy around. Luckily, LaJoy didn't have too much damage, although that was the very beginning of what was a pretty rough night for him, finishing in the 21st position. No night was more rough, however, than A.J. Allmendinger, who had a very difficult weekend at Iowa here between both the Xfinity and the Cup Series race. Both times, a flat tire puts him into the outside wall. Today's in the Cup Series race didn't seem quite as serious when he bounced off the outside wall coming down pit road, but it was clear that there were some issues with the suspension. And after at least 2 different pit stops, the crew came over the radio and said, hey, we just don't want you to have another crash this weekend. So they just ended up pulling out of the race. And much like we saw at Sonoma last week, we had a driver that fell out of the race very early in this event, although not quite as early as Denny Hamlin's engine failure. This after 54 laps here was Allmendinger's last place finish. And then again, looking at the rest of the bottom 5, Kyle Busch, who had a very strong car. Again, just like we saw at Sears Point, seemed like he was going to be able to get a top 5 finish out of this night. But then unfortunately, issues with the suspension underneath the car there, and then a power steering belt breaking after he returned to the track. Whatever it was just snake bit out there, and they ended up pulling out of the race. He and Allmendinger actually the only drivers listed out of the race as DNFs. Kyle Larson being your 34th place finisher, also very rare to see him down there, especially after an accident, and especially an accident at a non-super speedway, I would have to say, from his career. He had what looked to be easily the best car in the early stages of the race there. Unfortunately, a 3-wide battle off of turn 4. It seemed like people were finding themselves in the middle groove there, and he was making a very aggressive move, much like Josh Berry did, that actually worked out for Berry. But in Larson's case, they're trying to find the middle lane there. Didn't quite work. Some contact from Suarez. And seeing a comment from our Jimmy Thomas there, a longtime follower there here of the show, also contacted him during the J.D. McDuffie research, pointing out that there were issues with the transition between the pavement. And it seemed like that was really what caused Suarez to get up into Larson. I think it's a good analysis on that because it did seem like kind of a strange spot for that to happen and for a car to just jump out of line like that. But regardless, the result was the same. Larson spins out, collects Denny Hamlin on the front straightaway there. It could have been an even bigger accident than it was. It definitely messed up both their nights there for sure. But Larson still cleared the crash clock. Fine job by Cliff Daniels and the crew to get the number 5 back out there. And just an unfortunate deal for him. But they did manage to fix whatever was wrong in that wreck there in about 30 laps, which was very impressive. He was about 4 or 5 laps down when he went to the garage area, finishes the race 36 laps down. But we had deceptively low attrition despite the number of tire failures we did see in this race. And Larson ends up in the 34th position regardless. Kaz Gralla and Eric Jones running at the bottom 5. Gralla 5 laps down and Jones 3 laps down, both of them in contenders early on for last place. Jones with at least one flat tire, I believe 2, at least that was shown on camera there, but dropping them further back in the order there as well. Mentioning Denny Hamlin and his involvement in the Larson incident, he ends up 24th, 2 laps down, the first car 2 laps down. Michael McDowell just getting one of his 2 laps back on pace at the finish there after a flat right front of his own, finishing in 23rd. Chris Buescher was very strong in this race. Unfortunately, he was another one of the drivers that got caught up, bounced off the outside wall. He ends up 18th, 1 lap down. And again, Martin Truex Jr., after announcing his retirement from full-time competition at the end of this season, his first race afterwards, he finishes 15th, the first car 1 lap down. Definitely an improvement over last week when he ran out of fuel coming off the final corner there and was struggling to get to the finish line. So a lot of storylines. We'll definitely talk more about the Truex deal. That's why I brought out the 19 shirt here for the show tonight and talking about that too. So again, I'd have to say, I mean, a really enjoyable race, I would have to say, and one that was extremely well produced. There's a lot of good news from this week, I would have to say, from all 3 races, really. We were all anticipating after Fox has really just had very bizarre mistakes, even for them this year, or just real and major issues in production. Obviously, we're on the eve of this new arrangement for next year. We're now hearing Fox taking over IndyCar coverage next year, and I'm sure there's a lot of parts being moved around behind the scenes, but it definitely had a negative effect on their Cup Series coverage this year, which was sad to see, because they used to be the industry standard. Watching the footage from 500 Days, actually, earlier today before this race, kind of got me thinking about how much that's changed back then. Because, of course, back in early 2001, which we're still covering in that series, they were the mark. They were talking in that broadcast. I was watching the 2001 Spring Texas race. They were talking about different camera angles they were using to make sure they didn't miss anything. The sound editing and just how many people were involved in it, just the number of different pit reporters and how much experience that they had. It was much more reminiscent of what we saw in the NBC broadcast tonight. I thought first and foremost, I still think that Rick Allen is probably still the weakest part of this here. I think that, his play-by-play still comes off kind of flat, which is unfortunate because everything around him is like really pretty good. And honestly, I think without Dale Jr. in the booth, I didn't feel that as much of a problem in this because I felt that the booth was already too crowded last year. I would have been fine with either Jeff Burton or Steve Letarte being moved to a different position. But I didn't sense it was as much screaming over the top of each other as we had in races in the past. I felt the audio was very enjoyable to listen to. I think that the sound effect audio as well as the engine noise was fantastic in this broadcast. It really hit the speakers pretty well in here. I'll be curious, those of you in the chat there, if you can mention it more about, the sound balance on just like a regular TV with like factory speakers. Hopefully that came across very well as well. But I found it very enjoyable. I thought that it was very immersive, especially going to Sears Point just last week and hearing what, of course, everything is never going to sound as live as it is when you're at the track there, especially on pit road. But this was very close, I would have to say. And I think whoever was, editing all that or what microphones they were using or where they were placing them, they did a fine job. And I've forgotten how good NBC can be at that. So I think that they've kind of, they've trimmed things down in the right spots here. It's unfortunate to not have Junior for his historical knowledge involved in this. And, I'm hopeful that, the arrangement that comes in next year is going to be much more conducive to his approach to broadcasting there. So that'll be a net positive, I think. Obviously, he still does the podcast and everything else, so it's not like we're losing him entirely from this year's commentary. But yeah, I thought they did a nice job. I thought it was a solid broadcast. I thought it was enjoyable. And again, even with Rick Allen, as critical as I've been of him, including tonight, I didn't sense as much of him just reading off car numbers or just kind of going through the motions or anything like that. In fact, there was one point in this broadcast where he and Jeff Burton were kind of playing off each other, and he kind of let a little bit of personality creep in. I wish he would just kind of, just kind of stick with that. Cause I mean, it's unfortunate. I think cause you have this great sound design. You have this great music that strikes up and everything. And then it's just like NASCAR Cup Series racing from Iowa. And it's like, it just doesn't fit. I think it is a direction issue because he's capable of doing it. It's not quite there. That's probably the only negative I would say from this. I understood Steve Letarte was not feeling well this weekend. Certainly hope he's feeling better. He was not able to participate in the Xfinity broadcast yesterday, but we heard him today. And I don't know if it was just a net effect of him just not feeling well or it was the fact that it was fewer people in the booth. But I thought he was fine. I thought he wasn't, as shouting and as much there too. Same with Jeff Burton. I think that they balance pretty well. So I'll be interested to see if that stays the same here in New Hampshire, Nashville, and onward as we the NBC portion of the schedule really gets going here. So yeah, it was definitely enjoyable. I thought the on-track action was very competitive. It seemed like this was a track where, kind of going back to the racecraft of it itself, it seemed like it was the kind where, there were so many questions about how this track was going to be handling and, what the racecraft was going to be and how this car was going to perform there. And then on top of all of this, the newly paved sections of the track, which as it turned out, much against mine and other people's concerns as well, was still wide enough that people could actually kind of get in there and actually race each other pretty hard. And even cars that went outside of that groove, they would lose grip or anything like that, but it wouldn't be necessarily as catastrophic as like Texas, where you get out of that groove and you're just going to crash. We saw a lot of people that would at least maybe get knocked out of the way, but they would keep going. So, I thought it was a very enjoyable race. And I think, I think NBC covered a good portion of it. We saw some decent mid-pack battles. We had replays that were shown that didn't take the full screen, so you could see what was happening live. During the Xfinity Series race, we had wrecks that happened in the commercial break, and they would show a replay during the commercial break as well, so you could still keep up with the action. I love that because that reminded me of like going to like a baseball park and you see the actual replay on the big screen while you're actually there. And it felt like that was very immersive too. So, and it was a great track to really start this off on. I don't feel like they missed too much of what was happening in this one. It felt like in most cases, any kind of situation was actually kind of covered. I personally liked for my own coverage, I liked that they had somebody in the garage area to actually track when people were coming in and out of the garage. They would actually have somebody interviewing drivers that were falling out of the race. This is especially important in the Xfinity race, which had much higher attrition yesterday. But then in the Cup Series race here, where you had drivers that were coming in and out of the garage and coming back from mechanical issues, they covered that both with Larson and with Kyle Busch to see them come back into the race. So these are all tremendous positives, and they're really simple fixes. I've said from the outset here, the big problem with a lot of these broadcasts has never been the big things. It's always been just a ton of different small things. And even if they don't fix all of them, if you fix like half of them, you'll notice a massive difference. And I feel like that I really got a sense this whole weekend that they took some notes from last year. Because again, I've been just as critical of NBC as Fox in particular, and I'm certainly not the only one. And I'm sure that they were listening to all kinds of different people talking about all this here. I thought it was an engaging race. It was a very treacherous track. And I felt that they portrayed it in an accurate sense there. I felt like, you had cars that would slow down, even on pace laps, when you had Josh Berry running in the back of Stenhouse, or other incidents like that, where, it seemed like cars would handle 3 and 4 better than 1 and 2, or people spreading out to try to kind of get around somebody there. But, I hope for the fans that were at Iowa itself that the wait was well worth it, because I think they put on a fantastic show under the lights at the finish there. Fireworks going off. You had Rusty Wallace being part of the opening ceremonies. A massive moment, I can only imagine, for everybody that was viewing it there. So again, the way it played out there, I think it had just the right degree of unpredictability. There were issues with the tires. We saw, I'm sure, more tire failures than maybe most would like in one case or another there. But at the same time, though, I mean, I don't think that's entirely a negative thing either. I mean, you really have drivers that, perhaps have run for a long time where tire wear hasn't been an issue, and they've had to adjust their driving style. We saw this back at Bristol when Truex and Hamlin were pretty much on an island by themselves because everybody else was dropping out and having multiple tire problems. This wasn't quite as chaotic as the Bristol race was, but it certainly wasn't, a real, uninteresting race like a Richmond race or anything like that either, even though this track was designed with Richmond a lot in mind when it was being put together there. But I think that, it's its own thing. It's very different from the other short tracks on the schedule. I do consider it a short track. It's still under the strictest definition, less than a mile around there, although much closer than some of the other ones that are on the circuit there. But I'm feeling very positive about the direction of both that race on the schedule and what's going on with the network going forward. So NBC and USA, I think they did a very solid job. So we'll have to find out what the story is going to be there. The other thing I want to kind of mention with Rick Allen, now I'll kind of get into this in the Xfinity Series race too, is when we had all the tire failures that were happening in Saturday's race, and again, we saw some pretty hard hits. I mean, thankfully this is a track that was developed at a time where the safer barrier was already pretty much the industry standard. And interestingly, we saw from a lot of people covering this, it didn't even have a concrete barrier behind it to anchor the safer barrier on there. But I liked that Rick Allen in particular was cognizant of the dangers of the sport. And he said very early on, when you had actually a couple of, pretty hard hits like AJ Allmendinger's was in Saturday, and some others there, that he acknowledged that, yes, this is a dangerous sport. And I found that so refreshing, because I think that's the other criticism I've had of his play-by-play, is that, there's this casual nature there. Offsetting versus, Mike Joyce on Fox, where I feel like he takes it much more seriously and understands firsthand, first of all, from his own experience, how dangerous the sport can be. I don't think Rick's quite been exposed to that as much, or at least he doesn't let on about that in his play-by-play, if that is the case. But I was refreshed to hear him say that. I'm not saying everything needs to stop and, we need to treat everything like it's the biggest, most serious thing. But when you do have some pretty hard hits out there, I think it's worth, pausing a little bit and not just being like, playing goofy music over it and laughing it off or anything like that. So I was very appreciative of that as well. So I want to kind of get that out at the same time before talking about it this weekend. This was a great weekend for broadcast in general. I want to also give a particular shout out to Eric Brennan for his fantastic play-by-play in the ARCA race. For anybody that's wondering what on earth I'm talking about when I criticize what's happening with play-by-play, especially being the main guy that's describing the action, and if you think there's really no difference between, the modern approach and, what happened in the past, I would encourage you to watch that ARCA race because I thought Eric did a fantastic job of describing the action in a series that I think has not been fully promoted. I feel like Jamie Little, for as excellent as she's been as a pit reporter, has not been, as good of a play-by-play anchor. And it's unfortunate because, I do feel that she has the same interest in, the garage area and actually talking with these drivers. I don't feel like it's a lack of knowledge about these drivers. I've seen Jamie Little talk with Brayton Laster just at Kansas earlier this year when she was doing the play-by-play for the Tide 150. Just like I'd seen Vince Welch work through the garage area back when he was covering Truck Series races a couple times. It just doesn't come across in the booth, in the moment. That maybe the approach is simply to describe the action, but not contextualize it. What I feel that Eric did very well, and this may be the subject of a video further down the line here, was he contextualized it in the moment. There would be a tangle between a couple different drivers, and, what was it? You had Chris Wright, and then you had like one of the other teams that was out there, and they're bringing up that the driver that was running the car, it was the first time that he'd run it, and that he was working out a deal for later this season. I liked that they weren't just saying car numbers, that they were saying drivers, that they were like, personalizing it, especially when you have a caution where you have a lengthy period of time where there's not any racing happening. That really gives you a chance to kind of unpack what exactly happened. Not just going over replays, but everything else there. So, I want to give a big shout out to Eric on that, because I haven't really listened to his broadcasts in late models. Apparently, he's been very successful in working in the Cars Tour and so forth there. And if that's the case, I'd be very excited to be listening to that. But that was an excellent job. And again, in a series that really needed that kind of attention. I personally found back at Kansas that the ARCA field is really fascinating to look at. When you have between, again, still the very old school independent drivers. You got Brad Smith out there running the remnants of the late James Hilton's team. You got Alex Clubb, who actually had a second car entered this week out there, and other programs out there, Wayne Peterson, of course. And then you have this mix of these other bigger teams out there, and then, very few that are kind of in the middle. It's an interesting series, and it requires kind of a dynamic approach to it. So I was very pleased with that. I was kind of watching that, watching clips from it initially, and then kind of catching up to it, because I didn't watch the race live. But I was watching it afterwards there. And, I thought that was very enjoyable, and the level of excitement was appropriate to it too. He was actually kind of describing the action. It wasn't like it was a constant, filler. It wasn't like, on radio where you can't have dead air kind of thing. But whenever he was talking, I felt 100% engaged. And I will say, first listening to it, when I first heard his voice from the clips, I thought for sure it was Alan Bestwick in the booth, because it felt that way. Alan always had a very, really, I know he's still active now, in other motorsports and everything, but I always felt like in his NASCAR career, he always, brought the right information at the right time. And he would tell you, not just tell you what's happening, because of course we're all watching it, but describing it in such a way that why you should care more about it, or, what this means potentially. There's an ongoing storyline that led up to the green flag, and then what's the next chapter here? Is this is maybe a guy that's coming out there with the last car that he has in his shop, or is it a situation where he's had 3 straight wrecks and, or something like that? Things like that, to really kind of trend, describe in such a way that you be engaged, and then you want to learn more about it. Maybe you want to look up statistics on these guys. So that was thrilling. I really enjoyed that. I don't know what his next plans are in terms of the ARCA series, but I hope he gets more opportunities, and I think he's very deserving of it. And I think that's so refreshing. I mean, I've been saying for a long time, they need new blood. They need new people. They need new approaches, and just be fresh with it there. Everything in this sport has changed so much in just the last 5 years. And yet they just kind of changed everything just kind of around the approach to the broadcasts here. And I'm glad to see that between both especially the production side on NBC, although again, I think the booth did a very solid job here. I think it was right there in the middle. We didn't have a big moment that really kind of, tied things together very well. That's why I kind of have the 80 family members thing on the caption. I think that became kind of a meme by the end of the race, because they just kept saying it over and over again, but not adding anything new to it. That was, again, but that's kind of splitting hairs at this point. Can't help but bring it up though, because I mean, if it gets distracting, then it's okay, hang on, just right the ship a little bit. Let's go a little this direction. But between the production was so good, so good, and so enjoyable here from this. And then, combined with Eric's broadcast there in the ARCA race, I think it was a fine start to the weekend there for that. And I'll be excited to see much more in the future here. So again, kind of going around Ryan Blaney's win here, again, punching his ticket into the playoffs, although he looked very good in the point standings up to this point here. It seemed like he was going to be winning somewhere this year once the Ford teams kind of figured out whatever the issue was that was holding them back earlier. It seems like ever since Wilkesboro and Keselowski's win at Darlington, they've really turned the corner on that. I really thought Chris Buescher was going to pull this off, or Josh Berry. I picked Logano to win this because I figured a new track was kind of Logano's trend, him winning the first Clash, the first Gateway race, and so forth. But it wasn't quite meant to be there, although he did still have a solid sixth place finish again, pending the results of post-race inspection there. So that was kind of an interesting story there. Talk about the last place finisher there with AJ Allmendinger. The first time the number 16 has finished last in an inaugural Cup race since the first Talladega race. Don Schisler drove the number 16 car. He was one of the support race drivers there from the Saturday event, the Grand Touring drivers, and dropped out without completing a lap, along with another competitor out there. Schisler was credited with the last place finish, the first last place finisher at Talladega, I believe the last one until about 2000 with Kevin LePage. So kind of a rare car number in last place history. For Allmendinger himself, it had been his first one since Fontana last year. The last race at Fontana to the first at Iowa. Kind of an interesting transition in the schedule on the Cup Series. I guess you could say at the same time here. So that'll be another one to look at. But hopefully it stays on the schedule. I think it's got it looked like it had a wonderful atmosphere around the track. I think about all the corn references from this weekend. We actually had a farmers outreach program that was done over at the Sonoma Raceway or Sears Point just last week. They did that over in the Turn 1 complex out there. And Ross Chastain, I believe, was involved in that, and it was much more like an agricultural, kind of. I was about to say just a display or just kind of an introduction there, kind of like what they had at this Iowa race here too. I don't know if that's something they're doing every week. I didn't really see anything like that at Kansas as much, even being out there in the Great Plains. But a cool kind of another aspect to it there, especially with Chastain's role in here as a watermelon farmer himself. So as a pavilion, I believe they call it an agricultural pavilion back at Sears Point. That seemed like that was pretty popular because it was right next to the fan midway there. So you had a lot of people checking that out too. Again, I think that's pretty cool and just adds an extra bit of the local culture to the tracks. I like that they bring that out for these different venues, that it's not just the next one on the list. Let's actually talk about, kind of the region and how it's defined. And that was another thing I think I liked with the broadcast too, is a lot of these establishing shots of the track, showing kind of the rolling hills leading into the track there, the big displays of the Iowa corn logo and stuff in the field. It just looked gorgeous, looked very inviting. Very much, you can see it's the same region from the Field of Dreams thing. And of course the track has the infield of dreams. So that was a fun, aspect there too. But yeah, it just seems like it's a really cool track. It seems like it's got, a nice, big seating area, but not too big. It did sell out, as they said, very quickly once this track was announced last year. In fact, we were looking at this originally to kind of link it up with Sears Point last year. But when they sold out the seats so quickly, we were like, well, maybe we'll let the first one go by here, maybe try that in the future. I thought it was very enjoyable. So I think it'll be something exciting to see in the next coming races and in the future here. Kind of going into the Xfinity Series race, I want to talk about this as well. Kind of an interesting deal with that race with Glenn Reen being a last-minute entry. And I know that name kind of popped up out of nowhere. It did as well after doing my entry list article, which I usually post those on Friday. Even that morning, still wasn't exactly sure who was going to drive that second Joey Gase entry that had been listed on there. But this is a driver running in the modified series, a track champion at the Stafford Speedway, finally getting his shot at NASCAR. He was already slotted to make his Xfinity debut next week at New Hampshire, which, of course, is like the Daytona for the modified stars, of course, one of the biggest races they run out there in the modified tour. So he's making his debut. I believe Justin Bonsignor is making his debut next week for Joe Gibbs Racing as well. Getting some other modified stars out there, very much the same way that Ryan Preece, got his way into the Cup Series eventually too. So that's really good to see, kind of getting some other drivers out there, and we'll talk more about that, I guess, next week there when we lead into the action there. But he had an unexpected second start in this one. In the early laps, it sounded like a fuel pressure issue, which was surprising because he was racing Haley Deegan so hard in the opening laps. Actually, much like in the Cup race today, we had stretches of this race where it was basically side by side for last place. We've seen a bit of that at Richmond, for example, but this one, it seemed to stay that way for much longer. Whether it's just, how much momentum drivers pick up on the outside lane, or, again, the difference of the different contact patches out there with the repaved sections of the track. Regardless of the cause, I think it made things very compelling. You could tell when it gets down to about 100th of a second, you got drivers that are side by side at that point. And that was very much the case in both the start of the Xfinity race and the Cup race. Unfortunately, a carburetor issue, which is the first time that a Xfinity Series driver that finished last had a carburetor issue since 1984 at Nashville, which was Darrell Waltrip's first last place finish in the Xfinity Series, at least as it was reincorporated in 1982 from the late model Sportsman Series. An interesting turnaround there. AJ Allmendinger, as mentioned, had a very hard crash, the first of many that day with tire failures. We saw much more of them with the old 5-lug wheels than we did in the Cup race today, although we saw a fair number. Probably somebody out there, I'm sure, will track the numbers and actually kind of show how similar the numbers were there. But it seemed like there were a lot more in Xfinity, or at least they were more catastrophic. They seemed to result in incidents that actually brought out the caution flag there. You had Brandon Jones with an engine failure coming down pit road. His bad luck streak continues after he was last place at Sears Point last week, getting in the big wreck in turn 3. And then the week before that at Portland, wasted a car coming off of turn 12 in a big pile up coming off that corner. Again, just a difficult stretch for him, and we'll see how things turn around there. Blaine Perkins and Shane Van Gisbergen and Kyle Weatherman involved in a tangle off of the back straightaway. Van Gisbergen sent to a backup car after a practice accident. The backup, which I believe was pointed out, actually did look very much like Alan Kowicki's unsponsored car before Hooters came on board. I believe Seth Eggert pointed that one out. So again, good comparison there. It did look very much like that with the red number 7 there on the white Colleague Racing background there. But unfortunately, a short afternoon for him. Right at that moment, when Van Gisbergen wrecked off on the back straightaway, there was about to be a radio report indicating that Jones, Allmendinger, and the Reen car were all out of the race. They didn't get to Reen before the cutoff there, but ultimately Reen didn't return to the race in the number 53 car, and he ended up being your last place finisher in this deal. Very physical race there. We saw Justin Allgaier and Austin Hill, the 4th and 1st place qualifiers, as well as Jesse Love, the 9th place qualifier, all of them having tire failures at one point or another. And eliminating him from the race. I know Austin Hill was very much blaming himself on the radio, which was surprising, especially since his was so late in the going. It seemed like everybody was just kind of having a problem one way or the other there. But it ended up being a very physical race there at the end of it. Looked like Riley Herbst was going to pull off another win, try to win for Stuart Haas's Xfinity team, just like we saw with Josh Berry being very good with the Cup Series team this weekend here. Unfortunately, wasn't quite meant to be. Sam Mayer, much as he did at Texas, was able to capitalize and make the right move at the right time. Led 47 laps there from the 5th starting position, and the Roto-Rooter Chevrolet pulling off the win there. Mayer, I can understand him being outspoken as a driver that's being overlooked in terms of discussions about getting rides in the Cup Series. It may seem a little bit early there, given the fact that I think about a couple years ago, he was struggling just to get his first Xfinity win. But once he got that win back at Road America, he's definitely turned the corner here. It has been, very much a challenger there. And I guess, you got to try to cash in when you got a hot streak going. And I guess it doesn't hurt to sometimes say the quiet part out loud there. So we'll see if something comes up, if some Cup opportunities come up. We've seen that with so many drivers this year, including Corey Heim, who we're going to see again on the Cup Series side at Nashville here in a couple weeks. It's going to be exciting. And Mayer is making a good case to be in that mix again. So we'll find out if that's going to be the situation. Speaking of Heim, he ends up getting the 3rd place finish in the Xfinity race, a new career best run for him after starting 22nd. So a fine job for him. Sammy Smith and Sheldon Creed rounding out the top 5. Behind them, Cole Custer in 6th. Matt DiBenedetto in 7th was in a 3-wide battle off of turn 4 for position and prevailed with the RSS Racing team, the same team, mind you, that finished last in the most recent Xfinity race at the Iowa Speedway back when it was a start and park effort that J.J. Yaley drove. So that really speaks to how much that team has improved just in the time that track has been off the schedule there. So an impressive turnaround there. Also, looking further back there, Daniel Dye taking a 10th place finish after starting next to last in the Rusty Wallace throwback car. Tremendous effort for him. I believe a career best, if not very close to it, for his career. Leland Honeyman was almost in the top 10. He and Ryan Ellis had a bit of a game of bumper tag there at the end. Ellis ends up at the 14th place finish. Honeyman in the 13th. Joey Gase in 16th there. Again, tremendous effort for them. Obviously, it was a 38-car field for 38-car entry list for 38 spots, so qualifying wasn't a factor, which I'm sure was something that they were very relieved about. The last 3 consecutive races, the Joey Gase team failed to qualify with 3 different drivers. So, again, a difficult deal. Akinori Ogata at Charlotte, Frankie Muniz at Portland, and then Sage Karam just last week at Sears Point. This time they enter 2 cars and get both of them in the field. I'm sure that's something that's going to help at least start pushing the momentum back the other direction. And Gase is pretty solid over at New Hampshire, too. But Iowa, this being his home track, I'm sure he wanted to make doubly sure that he'd be able to qualify for this race here. I believe it's his 18th start here. I mean, you kind of forget about how many races in the Xfinity series that this track's actually held back when they ran multiple races a year in just that stretch there, too. So a driver of his caliber has actually run here quite a bit. Right behind him, David Starr was going to run double duty with the Cup Series. He ends up in the 17th place finish after starting 31st on the grid for the SS Greenlight team. So it's always good to see Bobby Daughter's team. Apparently, Patrick Emmerling was very close to getting a good run himself. Got spun out off turn 4 there on the final lap, but that cost him positions. He ends up 23rd, the final car on the lead lap at the finish there. But just a very brutal race. A lot of drivers with wrecks and flat tires. We had a lot of flat tires in the Cup race, but I guess just the durability of the Cup car definitely changed how a lot of that played out. However, it was an interesting way that it all played out at the same time. So, and again, a solid broadcast. I thought it was engaging. I liked that they kept up with the action. I liked that they followed up on Dawson Cram and his father, Kevin, and finally giving him a shout out for the times that he's been in the Cup Series as a crew chief, Kevin, that is, with his time driving. He was the crew chief for Bill Elliott when he won his only race as an owner driver, when he won the dual race in 2000 at Daytona, not a points race, but, again, a fine effort there that really saw him pretty much have the best year that the Bill Elliott Motorsports team actually really ever had in that 2000 season there. But that was a big part of that. And I'm glad that they got featured, especially on Father's Day weekend too. Again, of all, it's nice that I'm sure they're going to feature any drivers, and of course the family members in Ryan Blaney's case here. But it's nice that they kept in smaller teams as well. Dawson, of course, driving for JD Motorsports there. He and Garrett Smithley, the teammates this week around here. Smithley in the 26th spot, and Cram a couple spots ahead in the 22nd spot at the finishing order there as well. So a fine effort out of those teams there with the cars in one piece. But again, an interesting weekend. I want to give a particular shout out to DNF Racers for taking some great pictures this weekend and sharing those, and also Small Budget Racing, or Budget Racing 51 on Twitter. Sent some great videos of the last place finishers going to the garage area, both in the Xfinity and Cup Series racing. Seems like this is very similar to Kansas, where there's a lot of people that have followed the last place action there, and also check out racing out there. So I'm very glad that they have the track out there, and I'd love to cover it one day. So we'll see if that's going to be something we'll add on our list at one point or another. Another interesting thing, speaking of the last place championship here, looking at the standings, Brandon Jones and Sam May are actually tied currently for the last car Xfinity Series lead. Both of them have just one last place finish, 4 bottom 5s and 5 bottom 10s. So very surprising that the driver that almost finished in last place on Saturday and Sam Mayer, the winner of that race, find themselves in that position. But that's because we have not had a repeat last place finisher in the Xfinity Series. And I believe we still haven't in truck or in Cup this year. Certainly Allmendinger is a new one here on the Cup side. since his most recent Cup was last year at Fontana. So we'll find out how all that shakes out once we get the article posted a little bit later this evening. But again, really enjoyable race weekend. I think there's a lot of positives to glean from it, and I think this kind of leads things into the rest of the season very well, I would have to say. Another thing I think that got a lot of notice in practice at the Iowa Speedway here was the situation that Ross Chastain faced after a flat tire. And lo and behold, the tow truck drivers out there figured out that a dolly does exist, and they can put it under the rear tires and tow the car back to the garage area. Now, I know this got a bit of snark because it took 13 minutes, and I'll admit, yeah, that's way too much time. But it's not anywhere near as stupid as just hooking it up to the tow truck as you would with the Xfinity cars and just dragging the car to pieces with the diffuser and everything else getting ripped out from underneath the car. Clearly, they needed to do something else. And the flatbed's not really the answer either, because these cars just beach themselves like a Formula One car. And once it gets to that point, you're just toast. You can't go anywhere. And, unless they're going to improve the ride height and try to get a situation there where the car does ride a little bit higher off the ground, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But it would probably be a much simpler solution so they could at least get the car up to like this angle and tow it around the track without dragging the thing to pieces. If they're not going to do that, then this dolly is going to have to be the next best option. Now, there's a lot of professional tow truck companies out there, the Steps company included, when they came on board, when the next gen car was introduced, that they can smooth this out. They can figure out a way to make it quicker. And, actually kind of, maybe have it where it's like an inclined plane and the car backs up onto it and kind of rolls it back up that way. There's got to be some way where it's quicker. Because it's not like a dolly is the most unheard of thing. I mean, everybody was acting like it's like, who would even suggest this? It's like, well, first of all, me. Like, I've been talking about this at least since the Joey Logano thing last year at Pocono. But also, it's just a ridiculous problem to have. Now, I know people are saying like, oh, well, okay, how about we just have it so they can just change the tire out there? Like, send them out there with an air gun and a fresh tire and do that. Well, first of all, when these cars wreck, you don't know what the situation is going to be. When the tow truck pulls out there, they don't know it's just a situation where they just need to change a tire. And we've seen how fragile this suspension is. And, if the wheels pulled the other way, you can change a tire on it and the car still won't be able to drive anywhere. And then that's going to take more time. So I think the quickest option needs to be a solution where they just get the car off the track. Just do it as quick as possible. Not just if it's an overtime finish or whatever the situation is, but have the least effect on that. Obviously, 13 minutes is too much time, but I seriously doubt that it needs to take two trucks to get the car off the ground facing opposite directions and doing all that. I don't get why the tow truck company involved in this, the Steps company, is acting like this just never happens before. I mean, we've seen, the 24 Hours of Le Mans this weekend with a bunch of cars that run diffusers and run low to the ground. And it seemed like they were able to get those cars pulled off the track very quickly, even in pretty spectacular accidents too. So I think I'm glad they're on the right track. I'm glad they're at least doing this. I think that if they either fine tune the machinery, because I'm sure they had to come up with some kind of custom device to develop that brace that, hangs over the hood of the car and bolts onto the wheels there on the front there. If they were able to kind of craft that, I'm sure they can kind of figure out something with a decent dolly that they can kind of get to get the cars off the track. And I think that's, it's a quick way to do it and without causing a lot of damage. And as critical as I think a lot of people were going to be about that, I'll guarantee you that the folks over at the Trackhouse team are not going to be that critical about it because they didn't tear up a car that still could battle in the top 10 in this race here today. Whereas that wouldn't have been the same situation. They would have had a disproportionate penalty for just a flat tire. So I think that's the situation. I mean, I don't think it's realistic to say, okay, well, it's like, I mean, it's not like they're just, you're taking your personal car in there. It's like, okay, well, what? I mean, do you need a flat tire? Or, do you need a flat tire replaced or do you need a tow? The driver's not going to know. He's in the car and he can't get out of the car under the NASCAR rules. So again, the focus should be just like with any other tow truck, just get the car off the track and just do the best that they can with that. And yeah, if it takes extra time to get it off the dolly, well, that's just kind of part of the problem. But at least it's in this situation where it's not causing damage to the car. Because there's been a long, I'm sure, tenuous balance between these teams and these tow truck companies. how many situations we've seen where, a tow truck hooks up to a car and they kind of like drop it off too quickly, or, maybe cause more damage in trying to get it back to the garage area. I'm sure that's probably happened behind the scenes more times than you can count. Just last week at Sears Point, I saw when they were towing in Brandon Jones's car, and they kept the car in gear. So when the truck stopped, the car was swinging like on a pendulum, almost ran in the back of the tow truck there. I mean, a lot can happen in those situations. But I think a dolly is probably a practical solution. Is it something they're going to have to use in every one of these incidents? Probably not. If it's a situation where, a car could be pushed or something like that, that could be looked at too. But it needs to be at least available, and it needs to be a very efficient system that can be used with just one truck. Because if the other trucks are out there picking up other cars and so forth, suppose it's a big pile up at Daytona or something like that. But I think it's a positive step, and I don't think it's as ridiculous as everybody tried to make it sound this weekend. I didn't get that. It's like, come on, if your car is broken down on the road and it's a front wheel drive car, I mean, you see it in the owner manual. I remember in my Toyota Camry I drove back in the day, it would have a thing in the owner manual. It said if you towed the car this direction, the rear wheels are disengaged and you can roll it that way. But if you have it turned around the other direction on the front wheels, you have to have a dolly under it because it's front wheel drive. So it has to be, you have to work out all that. So again, it's not anything unusual. I think people were a little bit too quick to make it seem like it was something bizarre, because it should have been in the works right from the start. It should have been ready in 2022. I don't get why it took, 2.5 years? 2.5 years to figure this out? We knew from Fontana, the second race of the 22 season, that these cars would beach themselves and be stranded, and you couldn't get them back to the garage area without causing a heck of a lot of damage. So, again, that's the I think that's the situation they need to be looking at there. So, I don't know. But I'm glad something is being considered, because I'll tell you what, there's some people in the media outlets out there, they can just merely casually suggest something, and then boom, it gets instituted right away. And, I'll pop up on a show here, and you won't hear anything. So, not saying everything on this show is pearls of wisdom here, but that one seemed fairly obvious. So I don't entirely get it, but hey, that's the name of the game. So if somebody else wanted to take credit for it, great, fine. The important thing is it's getting done out there, and then hopefully it gets figured out. So I think that'll be cool. CT Racing Corner, thank you for your support. I appreciate you checking out the videos. So, I think it's mostly really kind of what I want to talk about for the Cup and the Xfinity race. We're already almost to the 1 hour mark here. We'll do some Q&A and so forth. I guess this would probably be a good point to transition into talking about Truex retiring. Again, bringing out the 19 shirt on here. An interesting moment. I remember at Sears Point, almost by the time, almost before he even crossed the finish line after running out of gas last week, there were people already talking about, is this going to be the year that Truex is going to retire? Is this going to be, and it's like, where did this come from? It's like, are we really going to do this all over again? Or we got to wait week on week and see if he's going to be coming back? I guess this culture has probably always been in the sport, maybe back to when, Darrell Waltrip or Richard Petty were struggling, back in the 90s or 2000s. But, it's just, I think it's such a distasteful part of it. Like, if the driver wants to step away from racing, and first of all, they're never going to say they retired. Even Truex didn't say he's retiring. The thing is, they're stepping away from full-time competition. They're not going to do the grind for 36 weeks a year or 38 weeks a year. And as big of a change as that is, doesn't mean they're not going to run part-time. I mean, heck, we saw Denny Hamlin already offer a ride for him in the Daytona 500. We'll see if that turns out. But hey, I think it was a very stand-up thing for him to do, and I think that would be a fantastic drafting partner, especially at Daytona, given that Truex seems to struggle more at Talladega. But I think that's whatever the motivation is, and whatever the deal is there. I mean, it's certainly been a tremendous career for him in the sport. I mean, again, think about AJ Allmendinger and what he's gone through in his career. Kind of going through a period where he didn't win and then finding his way to another team and then rejuvenating himself. Truex has gone through that even more times between starting out with DEI and kind of being, the next in line. I remember when he was starting off, he was like, he identified so much with Dale Jr. and of course they've been great friends, and that was kind of his motivation. He was kind of, I always sensed he kind of modeled himself very much off of Jr. as well. Back when he and Clint Boyer were going for the Busch Series championship. He gets into the Cup Series, and I remember him struggling in that one car for those years. Wasn't really a factor. Then 2007, he starts kind of turning the corner after a couple of years. Gets that dominant win at Dover. We don't see him win until he's already passed through, a couple other teams on his way over to Michael Waltrip Racing, and even a couple of years into that effort before he wins at Sears Point in 2013. And then, Furniture Row and Joe Gibbs. It's been just a massive career, just a real tremendous career. And at some points he seemed to be completely unstoppable. Where he and Cole Perrin were dominating in the 78 there. He's had other times where he's just been unbelievably vulnerable, where he just nothing seems to really turn out right. And he had some times where just trying to get a top 5 or keep the momentum going after Kurt Busch and Regan Smith were getting Furniture Row to turn around. If he can kind of keep the momentum going, he's experienced it all, for sure. And I don't blame him one bit for looking at all that and just trying something different and just saying okay, just scaling back. And, again, he'll still be around, as he said in the press conferences last week. And I don't doubt that, it'll be interesting in whatever number of starts he does. If he does like a part-time effort, maybe just does the 500. If he takes the Jimmy Johnson approach, and maybe just does, it's like, it'd be kind of interesting to run this race or that race. It seems like he has a support system in place. Sounded like Joe Gibbs wanted to hang on to him, but that decision's now been made. I am a bit surprised that Chase Briscoe is the leading candidate for his ride. I think Briscoe could use a career reboot after the struggles he's had on the Stewart-Haas team, which at one point had been like the dominating crime syndicate there in the Xfinity series back in 2020 when he should have won that championship that year. But ever since 2021, and obviously he won that Cup race at Phoenix there a couple of years ago. That can't be overlooked. But it's been a real difficult stretch. And is he the top prospect out there that would really benefit from Joe Gibbs' racing ride? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that still kind of remains to be seen. And I'm surprised that everybody's already jumping on this so quickly. It's like, oh, I love it when this happens. Like, oh, well, of course he's the lead candidate. It's like, well, what? Like, since when? Like, where did that? Am I missing something here? Like, I know that Briscoe's been very consistent this season, but again, nowhere near what we've seen out of him in the Xfinity series there in the 2020 season. I think there's been other drivers that have really stepped in. I mean, not John Hunter Nemechek. Like, I know he's struggling over there in the 42, but is he really doing that much worse than Briscoe this season? Other drivers that are in the Toyota pipeline. I mean, you're not going to put Corey Heim in it. I know there's rumors that he's just going to end up at 2311, and okay, if that's the case, then that's going to be a very good ride. Obviously, he's going to run that at Nashville, so that seems to be a lead candidate. But Joe Gibbs' racing ride would probably be even better. Has Heim not proved himself for that? I don't know. I don't see somebody going back to Gibbs. I think that usually seems to be a one-way route for drivers, no matter who they are, whether it's Bobby Labonte or Kyle Busch or Eric Jones or anybody like that. It seems like once you leave Gibbs to go someplace else, that's it. I mean, look at Joey Logano as another example. JJ Yaley. I mean, many drivers have, Joe Gibbs has, had plenty enough drivers cycle through their system and not gone that way. So I'm a little surprised that Briscoe is of the many drivers that are available, even the ones over at Stewart-Haas. I'd probably go with Josh Berry out of the current group. I mean, maybe it's just a recency bias over how well he performed tonight. But I think if you're also looking for, a young, or not even a young talent, just an experienced hand, Briscoe's up there, and he certainly is. He's shown that promise, and maybe he just needs that new environment to really come into his own. And maybe that's the way they're looking at it there. But we'll see. We'll see. I was kind of surprised about that. Why not Ryan Truex? Will he be? Great choice. Yeah. We haven't even talked about their Busch Series development drivers. Yeah. Why not him? That would have been great. I don't know. I don't know. It's just bizarre how it shakes out. But I'm sure with the backing that Joe Gibbs Racing has, with the pedigree that they have as like the top flight Toyota team out there, any decision that they're making is not going to be made lightly. It still feels surprising to me though, especially when we're talking about bringing a driver from another manufacturer. I know there was a picture that surfaced of Briscoe running Toyotas earlier in his career there, but I still think that's a pretty big change. Of course, I thought it was a big change when Josh Berry got the ride at Stewart-Haas after driving for Junior Motorsports in the Dale Jr. development program for as long as he had. So not unprecedented, but I guess we'll see how that works out. Very, very surprising. I mean, surprising in one sense that it came out this soon, but I could see from when they described this in the broadcast there of Truex making this announcement just to kind of move forward and just focus on, trying to win a race and trying to win a championship and go out on top. The way very few drivers ever do. And some have come very close. You think of Jeff Gordon and so forth. Again, we'll see if that's the situation or not. It's going to make this final stretch of the season really interesting as we, in fact, I guess, get closer to the halfway point here and what comes forward. And especially we go into New Hampshire next week where Truex is the defending winner, finally broke through with that win last year. His home track, or at least one of them, I would say. He's going to be very tough there again. And I think despite a kind of lackluster run today, I don't think that should change any of that too much there. So we'll find out. Yeah, Briscoe to the Wood Brothers makes more sense to me. Me too, I would say. Especially now with, indications about what Harrison Burton may or may not be doing. We'll find out if that's going to be the case. That's really kind of the long and short of it there. Let's see. Kind of checking out some other comments on here too. Oh, cool. DNF Racer sent me a great picture of Allmendinger's car here for the article too. So again, big thanks. I didn't see if you're in the chat here, but if you are, thank you again. I definitely want to make sure to use that too. Kind of checking out this. Really, I don't have too much of that checking out here. Oh, I was kind of looking at that. Tweet about Justin Haley there at the same time. So fine effort there for Haley. Kind of covered that already. Kind of going through my list here. All right. Well, I'll check the chat here if you guys have any other questions or anything, but we can do that, and we'll do some trivia questions here to wrap up the show. I know it's another late night show here, so I do appreciate you guys tuning in. We got about 60 people in here, so that's cool. So we'll do some trivia questions here to wrap up the show. And anything else I missed from this weekend or this week in the news, definitely let me know. I only watched a little bit of the 24 Hours of Le Mans there. I just kind of enjoy watching some of the late night stuff. Kind of makes me think about back when I worked night shift during the Daytona 24 Hours, so that's always interesting. Didn't follow it as closely. I was kind of stuck in the middle of that same thing with the restart protocol. They kind of went all night with the rain and everything. But it is what it is, I guess, with the rules that are in place. Alrighty. So we'll bring out this bad boy again here. We'll do some questions on this. So again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Again, so NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Go ahead and mention in the chat which one you'd like. We'll do a couple questions here tonight. Not doing any prizes tonight like we did last week with the Kawicki cards. Maybe we'll get to a point there we can do that more regularly there, but that's further down the line there. Hope you guys enjoyed that for those of you that were on our Sears Point show, which was last Monday. So we'll do that. Igadgo, yes, you've covered this, but how did you enjoy the NBC coverage? I thought it was fantastic. I think everything. I think even not having Dale Jr. there, honestly, I think anybody they took out of that booth was going to make it much less chaotic. They could probably do better with even getting one more person out of there. Take out Burton or Letarte, and I think it'll be pretty good. And again, they can still give him in our position there, maybe have him, do the Hollywood Hotel role or something. Although I think Jarrett and Brad Daugherty are doing a fine job with that. but yeah, I think it was pretty good. Definitely sound editing was better. Definitely the production was way better. And yeah, really enjoyable. If it stays at that level the rest of the season, I think it'll be very enjoyable. And it felt like an easier transition from being at the racetrack just last week. I'm missing it already. That was our last trackside coverage of the season. Those of you who didn't check out our Sears Point show there. We're already kind of making plans for next season, of course, waiting for the schedule to come out. But that was kind of the plan right now, to kind of save up some vacation hours and so forth. So we're getting that worked out. Willie B, thoughts on the IndyCar deal? I think, again, I'm not a big fan of the Fox production here, but this is a very different thing. Do I feel like they can just use the same copy and paste approach that they've used from NASCAR to IndyCar? No, I don't think so. The racecraft is so different. Of course, you don't have stages, you don't have all those gimmicks and so forth. It's almost a fresh start. We'll see which staff they're going to bring to bear on it, or if they're going to put the same people in the same places, they're going to have the same broadcasters. I don't know. But I do think that at the surface value, having all the races on broadcast TV is massive for IndyCar. I think that's huge. I think that at least if it stays that way, that's what I'm seeing at least in the press release. I don't know if that's changed since I last heard about it. But yeah, I think that's going to be great. I think that'll be, that'll help IndyCar be a bit more competitive there. Because the rest of their schedule just doesn't get any attention. I know I haven't watched IndyCar on a weekly basis, at least a decade for me personally. And I can't speak for others that have fallen the sport or fallen out of it. But that's been my experience here, at least. Sometimes it's been because of scheduling conflicts with NASCAR. Others is I just don't follow it as closely. Last time I covered, about 10 years ago is probably the last time I covered a race, an IndyCar race there. And I tried to kind of get more comfortable with it with the drivers and stuff like that. But I didn't grow up with it. It's not the same for me there. So that's just kind of been my experience. But having it on broadcast, having some stability, at least in that sense there, even with the schedule still adding, thermal as a points paying race and so forth, which seemed like it got at best mixed results this past season. We'll see how that shakes out. But I think the biggest concern I would have is the Indy 500, because I feel that NBC has, in these last few years, excuse me, especially with Lee Diffie on board there, they've really made that their own and really kind of celebrated this continued golden age I think the Indy 500 has had. Hopefully they bring, a similar amount of focus to it, that it's not just, the fourth or fifth race of the season there. If they treat it with the, the maturity that's needed, that would be great, because again, at the end of the day, I think if they approach it the same way as NASCAR, I'd be concerned. I'm not sure if they're going to, though, because I think there's a lot of ways that they just can't. And what the result may be is maybe they start over with some properties and so forth and kind of work into that. I don't know. And especially since they're going to, continue to have a presence in NASCAR. I don't mean to make it sound like they're not going to be involved in it, because of course they are. Yeah, I think it's, it could be the start of something big. So I don't know, but it's going to take the right people to make it happen. And I'm wondering how many people from the NBC IndyCar group are going to be brought over from that, because at that point you have people that are just used to, the different pace of the races, again, not having stage racing, the different personalities. You got to have people with those connections, I think, to really make that work. And so I hope they bring a lot of people like that on board. Whether or not they will, that remains to be seen. So we'll find out there. Yeah, last three Indy 500s felt like the biggest thing on the planet, Willie B. Yeah, I have to agree. It's been great. I think every Indy 500 since like 2010 has been like the biggest thing ever. But especially these last few have been just crazy. Andrew Bremner, any news about the schedule? Nothing I've heard. I've seen that meme schedule out there that's got some very significant races missing on it. I don't think that's real, because we have that last year too, and it turned out to be BS. I'm not going to really entertain that. So yeah, as to what's going to happen, we'll find out. Let's see. KBH, getting the question about any plans for more documentary series. Yes, indeed. I have more videos in the works. I was just working on the next episode of 500 Days today. In terms of series or like standalone videos, I have another one on Country Time Lemonade that I'm working on. I just need to get the visuals finished on that. That one's already been recorded. There's another piece of the puzzle I need to, it's actually something I'm waiting for that should be coming out on Monday, that I'm going to use to kind of finish that. So I'd love to get that done this month, because that's, you know, obviously with the subject matter, I think it's going to fit into a summer motif pretty well. Maybe 4th of July would be a cool way to have that up there. I just need to polish it to make sure it's ready to go. But I think it'll be an interesting video, something kind of a little different for the channel there. Same in some ways, but different in others, for sure. But yeah, many more videos in the works. And that's the other reason that we kind of just cut off the trackside coverage this year with Sears Point. I want to kind of focus on that more down the stretch here. Stenhouse. Yeah, there we go. Alan Bestwick is the IMS house announcer, so hopefully he gets a job. Yep, Michael, I agree. That would be great. They can certainly do worse than him, for sure. So we will find out. Which category is the top one here? I see tracks, teams, tracks. I see tracks, and I see teams have a lot here. We'll do tracks here and do a couple questions here to kind of wrap up the evening here. So this is our late edition part of the show here, I suppose. But we'll go ahead and do that. First question, who sponsored the winner's circle at the inaugural Las Vegas 400? Oh, here we go. This is a nice inaugural race connection here with Iowa tonight. Who sponsored the winner's circle at the inaugural Las Vegas 400? That is the first question. Just kind of checking the Twitter feed here, see if we have anything new here. All right. I'm just going to check the Pockra's feed here in the meantime. Interviews with Larson. We got the owner points. Oh, water pump listed as the failure for Kyle Busch instead of the power steering. That's interesting. But him listed out of the race. And then Allmendinger out with accident instead of DVP. That was the other thing I was kind of waiting on. But we do not have results from technical inspection yet. We will find out, I'm sure, a little later tonight and get that up for you guys in the Cup Series article. I'm seeing guesses for Gatorade and Sam's Town and Z-Max, Kmart, Wayne Newton, several guesses. This year is my 4th straight year going to Sonoma. It's the best in-person experience in racing. My first ever race was a 2007 350. Hey, God, go. Excellent. I'm glad you had a good time. I hope you had a great time for sure. I think that would be a lot of fun. As a 20-year Kmart manager, Michael Jensen, I'd love to see you or NASCAR Man do a deep dive into their sponsorship. That's a cool idea. You know, talk about a sponsor that's had cast a long shadow in motorsports. Yeah, that could be something that, you know, maybe is the beginning of something else there too. So stay tuned. That would be kind of fun. Yeah, I'm not sure what NASCAR Man has in the chamber there. I always stay tuned for his projects there. The latest one we did was the Danny Ongaias one, and that one was enjoyable, getting that out there. All right, let me read this off here. Who sponsored the winner's circle at the inaugural Las Vegas 400? So that would have been in 1998. The answer is McDonald's. McDonald's, how about that? We got the timing. We had the Grimace and the Hamburglar car tonight. So we have that. McDonald's is the correct answer. I wouldn't have guessed that. I was going to think a casino of some kind, like the Luxor or something. And Gatorade's a good guess, too, because, of course, that's a long time one here. So McDonald's is the correct answer. So the McDonald's winner's circle. Ooh, here we go. This is a good one, too, I think. We'll see. Next question. Who won his first pole in Bobby Allison's Mercury at Richmond in 1976? Who won his first pole in Bobby Allison's Mercury at Richmond in 1976? Pole, not race. So think about pole winners. Read that one more time here. Who won his first pole in Bobby Allison's Mercury at Richmond in 1976. Try not to look it up. So that'll be the other one there too. Yeah, ESPN covered it. McDonald's Winner's Circle, that did jangle loose kind of a memory there of the way it used to be on that. Yeah, 80. I think it was Klingerman that pointed out there. He's like, yeah, I could get 80 family members to something. Me neither. We keep a pretty small family out here. I think it would be several magnitudes on that. Let's see. Mark Martin once drove for Toyota too. Why couldn't he come out of retirement? Oh, I think Mark Martin's not planning on coming back. He's had some interviews talking about that. That would be interesting, though. Kind of a reunion there of the manufacturer. Kind of looking over the comments here as well. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Michael Jensen bringing up Chris Economack. He talked about Richard Petty looking to retire after the 88 500 in his big flip. Then he ran 4 more years. He did, and including a great run at Richmond the next week, which is surprising. You gotta go. I like that. Sonoma's wine, Iowa's corn. We need a track with a Victory Lane charcuterie board. I like that. Gotta have something like that. CT Racing Corner, Brock, who's your favorite NASCAR driver? I don't really have one now these days. I've gone back and forth between so many. Obviously, drivers towards the back of the field has been much more my focus. It's really hard to pick one. And especially nowadays, I do my fantasy picks there with Lastbro. He picked Chastain this week, too, so we actually had a pretty close contest on that, too. But, yeah, tough to pick one. Probably one of the last ones followed there was Bubba Wallace when he came in, when he was in the 43. I thought that was really cool. And then McMurray before that. And then, pretty much any other driver before then. Yeah, McMurray included and pretty much retired. So that's kind of been the thing. So again, that's just kind of been more the transition. I mean, everybody has, a bias towards certain drivers they like to pull for and everything. I've actually kind of found more drivers in the Xfinity series that I've kind of enjoyed more often. Because, I mean, it seems like, you just have a really interesting cross-section in there. And teams as well. So that's always cool. It was great to be able to meet a few more of them over at Sears Point last week. Yeah, Justin Haley had a fantastic run. Yes, he did. Let's see. Rob, seeing your comment, just caught Brock talking about the ARCA race on Friday. Definitely the best Fox FS1 coverage I've seen in a while. Still full of mistakes, but it was a great race. Absolutely, yeah. Zilich is the real deal. Agreed on that too. Yeah, again, I mean, nothing's ever perfect, but I mean, man, it's just A for effort, and it was an immediately noticeable difference. And it was vindicating to see it because it's like, okay, because I've wondered, I mean, we've had it the other way for so long. I have to really say, okay, wait a minute, was it ever any different? But thank goodness for like the NASCAR Classics page and these other things that have come up so you can experience these things not only as they were back then, but in like by far the best video quality that's ever been, which is fantastic. Then you can actually kind of experience it, which is great. I think that's helped, raise the level there a little bit. At least I hope so. It feels like it. Let's see. Talk about the Olympics. Yeah, the Amazon deal, I'm not sure about it. Douglas Lintz, I'm not sure about it either. And again, I know that's not the same deal for, for everyone. I know streaming isn't something everybody's using and all that, so there's that. But we'll see. We'll see. Okay, let me read the question again one more time here. Who won his first pole in Bobby Allison's Mercury at Richmond in 1976? And the answer is indeed Neil Bonnet. Oh, a couple of you got that. Charles Peterson, you got it. Wayne Stell, you got it. I think Wayne, you got it first, so there you go. Right on. Ever since Jimmy retired, I've just been a fan of everybody. I wear merch of 3 different drivers from different manufacturers. Yeah, exactly. I get it. Love putting on a NASCAR Classics race before bed. Desert Fox. Yeah, good choice. I mean, it really is comforting. You can watch those, and there's it's just, it really is immersive. You can kind of put yourself in that time, and especially have them in such top quality. I wish they have an interface for like Roku or any kind of like thing where it's not just on the computer. Like if they had as an app for like Amazon Fire or something, that would be great. Because I would love to watch them on like the screen here. I can hook the computer up to that, but we've always had problems with that. I don't know if that's been an issue for other people, but we've always had an issue with plugging the computer in and then it kind of flickers or something. So I don't know. Let's see. This is interesting. Next question. Where did Goodyear debut their Eagle tires with trademark yellow letters? This is an interesting one. Where did Goodyear debut their Eagle tires with trademark yellow letters? Think about that one. We'll just do a couple more here. I know it's a late night show on Father's Day here, so we'll wrap up here pretty soon here, folks. But thank you so much for tuning in. I'll keep this open here in the meantime. And nope, not yet. I would love to have it as an app on Roku. Yeah, exactly. It needs to be like an app. Hopefully that's in the progress. I have no idea what they're doing over there, but I mean that would be interesting. Because that would be great. I would just click through that. Man, you know, I'd have to take a staycation on that, watch some old races there that way. Because I love their interface. I think they've done a great job with it. They're still adding more races. Really cool. Where did Goodyear debut their Eagle tires with trademark yellow letters? And the answer is Atlanta. And Wayne Stell, for bonus points here, got it correct too. The 92 Hooters 500, indeed. It was that Atlanta race. The last race there, the first one that debuted with the yellow tires. In fact, if you look at my Bob Schacht video, I have the picture of the car Schacht qualified for the Hooters 500. You'll notice it has yellow Goodyear tires on it. But then the earlier cars in that video all had the white writing there. So it's interesting when that got phased in. It's also interesting that came up so late after the Hoosier Tire War when they also had white writing on the sidewalls. You would have thought maybe in '88 they would have introduced that just to differentiate themselves. But maybe it just speaks to the hostility of that they didn't feel like they needed to be the one to change. That would be kind of an interesting thing to find out. Yes, Atlanta. Ooh, this is good. We'll make this the last question of the night. We'll just do one more here tonight, folks, if you don't mind. A little bit of a shorter show here this evening, but we'll wrap up with this. What race had only 5 total miles rained out between 1959 and 1998? So we're talking about rain here. This is a good race, a good NASCAR topic. Even this thing senses it. What race had only 5 total miles rained out between 1959 and 1998? Yeah, it always goes back to Atlanta 92, doesn't it indeed? That's really the lightning rod of NASCAR history. Alrighty. Ooh, cool. Brett B photo on Twitter posted the intro. Let me speak to that too. That's the other thing. I really liked the Highway Star intro there. Oh man, I'm glad they paid the extra $5 to whoever, to the artist to get the actual song, to get the actual deal after playing that crappy, woohoo song last year and then the Well the year before. Those were thoroughly underwhelming opening themes. I'm glad they went for something classic and just, gets your blood pressure going there. I'm glad they did that. That was good. Oh, it was good. I'm hoping I like that it starts with the American flag at the beginning too. It's very reminiscent of the Bringing Back the Sunshine intro. So I'd love to see more of that. Very exciting. Must be Daytona, not Daytona. Everybody's forgetting the 65 Daytona 500. Sounds like the 500, but I guess Martinsville, Talladega, Winston Western 500. Let me read the question again. What race had only 5 total miles rained out between 1959 and 1998? Alrighty. Okay, here we go. What race had only 5 total miles rained out between 59 and 98? Okay, I think okay, this might not be correct. It says the Daytona 500, which you probably could guess from the time period in 59. But Charles Peterson, I think you're right. Yeah, it shouldn't be the 500 because the 65 race was shortened even further. I don't think it was shortened by just 2 laps. So that would be weird. I mean, you do hear about Bill France weather, and where the 500 was never like rain shortened. But yeah, 65 was shortened even further, wasn't it? And this is going for 59. Maybe it meant to say 69 or something. How much was the 65 shortened by? Kind of pulling that up. Yeah, that was shortened like 333. Yeah, it was shortened by a lot. That was like 67 laps. Huh. Okay, I don't think that's right. Yeah, I'm not sure that's right. So there we go. Let's see. Oh. Huh. Yeah, that's a weird one. These other ones are too easy. Okay, let me do one more question just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, I don't want to end it on a clunker like that. We'll do one more question here, folks. This might be a bit easier one. We're looking for a year. So last question here now, for real. What year did Atlanta International Raceway become Atlanta Motor Speedway? What year? Try not to look it up. Last question of the night. What year did Atlanta International Raceway become Atlanta Motor Speedway is the question. Yeah, I don't know who did the research for this either. I don't know. That's probably a story in and of itself. What year did Atlanta International Raceway become Atlanta Motor Speedway is the question. Oh, we got tech complete. Oh, let's pull it up. Let's go to the board. There it is, 39 seconds ago on Progress's page as well. Tech complete, no issues. Blaney is the winner, and therefore AJ Allmendinger is the last place finisher. Going to the wind tunnel are Elliott, Stenhouse, Bell, Wallace, Keselowski, and Logano's cars. Wow, that's going to be a full hauler there, bringing those, 6 cars? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 cars. Yeah, goodness. So there you go. All righty. Well, congratulations again to Ryan Blaney for punching his ticket. And again, we'll have a feature on Allmendinger coming later tonight. So guesses on, again, what year did Atlanta International Raceway become Atlanta Motor Speedway? Thank you, Jonathan, for the update there. Yeah, guesses for 72 and 89 and 91 and 77, 94, 85. Here we go. What year did Atlanta International Raceway become Atlanta Motor Speedway? The answer is 1990. 1990 is the correct answer. So Jeff K. Oh, Wayne Stell, you got it first, it looks like. Wayne Stell, you got it first, then Jeff K. And down the line there. So, yeah, so those are the two there. So, you had 1990, at least according to this. It didn't seem like it was, I figured it would have been sometime in the 80s, but maybe the 80s when they discussed it. So, there you go. So, all righty. Well, congratulations to Ryan Blaney for the victory tonight. And again, AJ Allmendinger will be your feature on the Last Car article for later tonight. Our entry list article for New Hampshire will be coming up this Friday. In the meantime, the website is lastcar.info. Patreon is patreon.com/lastcaronbrock. For more Twitter/X updates, check out @lastcaronbrock. And in the meantime, our next show is going to be next Sunday after the Cup Series, the USA Today 301 at New Hampshire. We'll talk about the Cup race, the Xfinity race, the weekend news, and anything else on the show. We'll do some trivia questions here as well. So I hope to have you here about 15 minutes after the checkered flag of the Cup Series race here. So thank you again for everyone for tuning in. Have a very happy Father's Day, everyone, and I'll see you all next week.